This is part two of this chapter two from the Sociology, Sex, Gender, and Power class, chapter two, which talks about the social construction of gender. So, because of the length of the many of PowerPoint slides that we have, so I decided to have a part two to this. Part two from chapter two, which talks about the ongoing role of the socialization process, in which we talked about before, and then gender identity. And the key thing is an ongoing process. Gender, as it stated, is a social, not no form of a natural phenomenon, meaning that it is learned. It is not just pop up out of the blue. It's not a natural phenomenon, but being is learned behavior socially. Now, though rooted in social institutions, as we just talked about before, gender is passed on through social learning, and it is enacted through our gender roles. So, let me blow it up a little bit. There we go. So, how do we learn these gender roles? And we talked about the process of the socialization process and how we are socialized to these gender roles, which I, barely briefly mentioned in the first chapter. Gender roles are learned through the process of socialization. It is through the socialization process that individuals acquire an identity, and it's based on the gender. Gender identity is an individual's specific definition of the self. Get into a little bit of George Herbert Mead, the symbolic interaction and sociologist. It's based on that person's understanding of what it means to be a man or a woman. In other words, it's through the socialization process that gender, again, it is socially constructed. So remember, it's an individual's specific definition of a self, even though society has its understandings and is reinforced through the social institution, but it's based on the understanding of what it means to be a man and a woman. Through gender socialization, there are different behaviors and then different attitudes are encouraged and discouraged in men and women. So if you think about that again, is that the behaviors and attitudes which society encourages, you're a man, you should think this way, you should behave a certain way, or as a woman, you should behave a certain way, and you're supposed to think a certain way. And through this gender socialization, and again through the agents of socialization, through the families, peers, the teacher, the media, even sports teams, and we talked about the religious groups, all of these are agents of socialization which help to lead to gender socialization. And some people become more perfectly socialized than others. So therefore, in the eyes of when you're doing a socialization process, some people become more familiar with this so-called role of gender that a man or a woman is supposed to play. However, others kind of defy and say, hey, there should be no certain role that I should have to play. So it depends on the individuals. However, but we're looking at it from a larger standpoint of society. And in society, it say, okay, this is how we socialize people. This is how you're supposed to act as a man and as a woman. And then some people adapt to it based upon the institutions and how they became socialized as they were growing up. To some extent, we probably all resist the expectations society have of us. And remember, the key thing is the expectations society has of us. Our being unique stems in part from this resistance as well as from the variation of the social experiences that we have. So, of course, that we have our own uniqueness, and at the same time, even though we have socially experienced different things based upon the individual, there is a form of resistance saying that, no, I'm the man, I'm not supposed to act, I don't have to act this way. Because I'm a woman, I don't supposed to have to act this way, even though society says this is how we're supposed to be. But at some point, going back to the women's movement, the women's like, hey, I know society doesn't want us to vote. However, it's our choice, and I believe we should. So that is a form of resistance during the culture of back then, prior to the rise of feminism and prior to women having the right to vote. So in their social experiences, some people were raised up, but these ladies like, no, this is not how we're going to have it continued. And although some of us conform more than others, and socialization acts as a powerful system of social control. So when we look at the social control, it's the fact that in this society that existed, more of a patriarchal society, there is this social control and power saying, hey, this is where things are. and this is how it should be. And because we have become socialized, and it's because it became part of this so-called powerful system that they had, and any form of resistance would cause people to fall back and say, "Hey, no," and it brings anger and frustrations to people. So, again, remember during the rise of feminism, when ladies were trying to vote, the men were putting them in jail, locking them up, arresting them. But the ladies had this strength and to move forward and say, "Hey, we're going to make this social change despite what the social institutions have in place, despite what the gender roles, as far as no, you're not supposed to defy the orders of our current society, but at the same time, the uniqueness and then that resistance and the different social experiences that these ladies had in this particular instance of the women's right for the right to vote, part of the three waves of feminism, was very important in the United States history and across the world. So what happens, for example, if you deviate from your expected gender role? So men, if they went across the social role that they're supposed to have amongst their peers, amongst the other people, they would be most likely be presumed as this old school term of being soft, indicative of the link between gender expectations and expectations about sexual identity. So with this so-called role of being soft, that, okay, you're not as masculine, and it became a negative term, especially when I grew up in the 70s, to say, "Oh, you soft." It's not so much when I perceive it, as the sexual preference, but when they say expectations of sexual identity, it gets a little bit further into what's considered, in my opinion, of what's considered masculine and feminine. So therefore, "Oh, you soft," and they got anger from men saying, "You know what? No, I'm not soft." And then the same thing with women, who they deviate expected roles for them. They labeled these so-called labels of tomboys. "Oh, she's a tomboy." I heard that a lot as I was growing up. She's a tomboy, meaning that she may have been more athletic. She may have been doing things that the boys were doing, so to say. And this is just a little girl just having fun. She liked football. She want to play baseball. She want to climb trees and do all the stuff that so-called that boys do. But then they label, "Oh yeah, she's a tomboy," or they be later labeled as being unladylike, which is a negative term in my eyes to be considered. This is unladylike. And then it is great that from when I grew up in the 70s, and I'm sure prior to that these ladies who may have a liking to sports of these so-called tomboys or these so-called unladylike behavior, which may have been something deemed as masculine that boys do back then. But if you look at the powerful positions that these ladies have, even into sports, there's more ladies into coaching in the male professional leagues. So not only do we have the ladies who are in the NCAA women's college coaching and other sports where they're predominantly women's teams. However, we have women who are crossing over to being officials in basketball and referees and stuff, and in football, and then they get into coaching positions, and maybe one day there'll be a woman's head coach in the NFL or in the NBA or Major League Baseball or hockey, something like that. So looking at some of the expectations of these ladies who's always liking the sports, I say continue on what you like to do, because I see a lot of more female sportscasters who are on these shows, and these ladies know about sports, and it's not like, okay, let's just throw a lady up there. These ladies know what they're doing, and they like sports, and it's okay to be yourself. And I think as a pioneer, a lot of these ladies who have crossed over into more of these so-called historical male-dominated sports, into coaching, things like that, I think it's going to be continuing on in the future. The socialization process controls us in several ways. Now, the key thing, it says it controls us, and it's a process. It gives us a definition of ourselves. Number two, it defines the external world and our place within it. Number three, it provides our definition of others and our relationship with them. And number four, it encourages and discourages acquisition of certain skills based upon the gender. So this is the way the socialization, according to the book, the socialization process controls us in these 4 ways. Be familiar with that, of course. You know, that's more likely an exam question. Homophobia, defined as the fear and hatred of homosexuals. Homophobia is a key word in here. It is a system of social control that encourages boys to act more masculine as a way of indicating that they are not gay, or this form of language of saying they're soft. Scholars have shown that the homophobic teasing that is rampant among adolescent boys is not so much directed at boys who are gay, but rather is intended to make sure other boys conform to the expected gender roles. So when they say stuff, and it's like back then as I grew up, and I'm glad the times have changed currently, that the roles have changed and everything's more socially acceptable as far as not so much of your sexual preference or who you want to date, but this so-called masculinity role that you're supposed to play as a man has gone away. It's okay for you to be a young teenage boy and an adolescent boy who's not into sports, or you're not this so-called over-masculine young man. You're just being yourself. If you're into video games and they say, oh, well, no, you're supposed to be in sports, or you're supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be doing that. No, it's good that you enjoy who you are and don't let no one's opinion of you change who you are. You know, and in this negativity, of course, going back in the day from years and years ago, but, you know, homophobia has been a problem, and hopefully it would not be a problem more in the future. Homophobia thus enforces the social construction of gender by discouraging men from showing so-called feminine traits, such as being caring. Remember, this is so-called feminine traits I got from the book, such as caring, nurturing, emotional expression, and gentleness. So this homophobia, according to the book, enforces the social construction of gender. It discourages men from acting in these so-called feminine traits. However, being as a father, you have to be caring, nurturing, emotional expression, gentleness. I don't even know if that's just from being. This is not so-called feminine traits to me. I think it has always been rooted historically in the social roles that say, well, no, you're supposed to be tough. You got to do this. You got to do this. And if you act nurturing and caring, but as a parent, you have to have that male, a woman or male, you know, male, female, it doesn't matter to me. And I think just being that, because kids needs that. And a lot of times as being a dad, especially if you have a daughter, and, you know, you have to show some of those traits that you have. And even with your son, you know, you can't be this so-called over-masculine dude all this time, because this child does need caring and nurturing from both parents. So it's not like, oh, that's the mother's job. She does that stuff. I don't do that, and mama's does that. No, And I'm glad the times have changed because of the fact there are a lot of men. My little brother is an example, as a single dad taking care of 2 boys, and he has to play the role of being a provider and so-called feminine traits, and he's done everything. He's a wonderful young man. He's taking care of 2 boys as a single dad by himself, working and taking care of the kids. And there are a lot of men who have these so-called feminine traits, which they're called in them. But I don't see it that way. I don't, you know, it's been historically called so-called feminine traits. But today I think that a lot of men have to really not follow that type of concept and just focus on being yourself and understanding that a child needs these not only from their mom, but from the father as well. Other examples of gender and social expectation, the cultural expectations associated with gender and beauty. According to the cultural expectations, body image, feeling they are never adequate. Again, as I talked to my students before, despite whatever the cultural expectations accord with gender and beauty, body image, love yourself and love who you are, and it does not matter. Back then, it was a thing about, oh, she couldn't weigh this much, or she has to be thin, or she has to look this way, she has to look this way. And then certain people may feel bad about themselves because they do not fit the image of what the cultural expectations are regarding beauty. And it's like a lot of these guys know we don't have 6-pack stomachs. No, and you know, but it's cool, okay, because you're a guy and a woman should. Nah, that's a mess. That's nonsense. I look at the body image, you who you are. There are some ladies, if you 200 pounds, love it. Love you and love who you are, because there's some men and ladies, whoever it may be, will love you for who you are. You don't have to change for nobody. You don't feel like, oh, I have to miss society's expectations and beauty. When you look in the mirror, that is the beauty that you see within yourself, no matter what. You don't have to change nothing, that you change it for yourself. Nobody's in the cultural social expectations should allow you to change. And you feel good about yourself, your beauty. When you look in that mirror again, the beauty is you, who you see. And if someone else sees the same beauty, and a lot of other people do too. So never feel bad about who you are, this so-called body image, what's being adequate. Hey, some people are going to love you for who you are. So continue to be yourself. If you want to change something, you do it for yourself, not because of what the culture expectation. Smoking, they said because they think it's cool. I think a lot of young people, I don't see them smoking cigarettes like they used to. I know they smoke them other things, but at the same time, it's just that I think back then it was like, okay, it's a cool thing to smoke a cigarette. And I tried it one time, and I think I was to cough for 2 hours. Like, oh, no, I'm not doing it. I was in high school when I was young, and I tried to smoke a cigarette because I thought it was cool back in the 80s, early 80s. And I never did that again. So I don't see a lot of young people. I know they vaping right now, but hopefully, more education and research on vaping, looking for the safety reasons for that. But I think that's just fit into the cultural expectation of what's considered masculine and what looks cool with smoking a cigarette. So as I continue, kind of switch it up when we look at race and gender identities, intersectionality, which the author of the book talks about, that teaches that gender does not exist in a vacuum. It overlaps with other important social factors. We look at race, ethnicity, age, ability status, social status, and a bunch of other things. And to shape our social experience, relationships, and identities. Got more information on intersectionality. I look at the Wikipedia's definition just to add stuff. So intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Examples of these aspects are your gender, caste, sex, your race, class, sexuality, religion, disability, physical appearances, and height. And they look at the two different modes because you can experience intersectionality as a form of discrimination, and then they also mention about intersectionality as a form of a privilege. So you have it both ways. Someone can feel discriminated against because of the intersectionality, which you have a combination of discriminations based upon gender, based upon race, based upon sex, based upon your sexuality, physical appearance, things like that. But then some maybe have a privilege based upon their race, their gender, their sex, their sexuality, anything. So it kind of goes into that a little bit. It identifies multiple factors, advantages, and disadvantages. These intersecting, which is overlapping social identities, may both be empowering and oppressing. So someone may benefit from these intersecting intersectionality, but some people can have it as a disadvantage and then become a form of oppression. One thing about gender, as we go through, and we'll talk about intersectionality later in the other chapters. This is only early part 2, chapter 2, so it's still kind of early, but we have a bunch of other chapters to go. When we think about the life course, I like for a lot of young people to think about the life course. And as it creeped up on me as my age at 50 years old, I look back, man, I tell students, I remember when I was 18 years old, I remember I was in high school. Being 50 is not just some magical age that pops up. All of us that were 50, I know we're considered as old people. And as my student would say, you about 50, you got one foot in the grave and the other one not. What I'm saying? I say, okay, I accept that, but I'm a cool 50. But I think about through the life course, and I think about my age when I was 18, and it seemed like yesterday. And I look at 19 in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, and even up to 50. I think, and I tell young people, 17 to 18, up until you're 30 is the most crucial point in your life, in my opinion. And when they say, I know some of you are a lot of young people, when they say life begins at 40, I didn't believe it until I turned 40. But I always heard it when I was growing up. Life begins at 40. And it does. And 50 is even cooler. So when we look at gender identity, it becomes established very early in one's life and continues as a people move through their life course. When we encounter new social experiences, keyword, when you're going to reach new social experiences, like I said, I remember my 20s, 30s, and 40s, we adapt new roles and identities as the expectations of others around us evolve. Now remember that the social roles and the culture have changed since the 1970s, since the 1960s. Things are so much different now with, people, gender identity is being so much socially accepted. I mean, there may be some few say, oh, I don't, man's supposed to be like this. And, that's something to do with your sexual preference, but this so-called gender identity. Oh, you're a man. He's a boy. He's supposed to do this, and I got to do this. And there's that old school values that some granddaddies and daddies have, and them uncles and them still have that perception. Even the mamas and aunties and grandmamas have that perception. Oh, he's a boy. He's supposed to do this, But it's going to change because you're looking for young people in the early 18s, and 20s, and your 30s, and your 40s. So much is going to change. You just even look at technology. Look how the cultural, the social roles have changed over the years. So just remember, as you get older, you will encounter new social experiences. You're going to adapt to these new roles and identities and expectations of others. It's going to evolve. The formation of gender is critical in the childhood, but it does not stop there. We will see below the life course categories. So the key thing, as y'all know me, I'm big on words. I look at words and say formation of gender, and it is critical in your childhood. It doesn't stop there. So think about, some of y'all a lot younger, childhood, you're 18, 17, 19. That was a few years ago, according to me. But you got somebody like me looking back, man, 1972, 1974, when I was a little kid. And our life course categories, we look at being an infant, childhood playing games, schools, sports, and socialization, and then adult socialization and aging. So remember, as I talked about in chapter 1, being an infant, girls in pink, boys in blue. And I kind of briefly mentioned it back in chapter 1 because I just want to pull you in to getting the understanding of how society has socialized us into our gender roles. And when they socialize us into our gender roles, it becomes a fact that it is a system that is in place and it is going to continue on even as we raise kids. So beginning as an infant, boys and girls are treated differently based on gender, of course. Research on infant socialization shows how quickly gender expectations become part of our experience. Something as simple as a birth announcement, you all call it gender identity parties, can start gender messages early. Remember, they got, some people, I went out and they had the big balloon and they bust the balloon and there's pink confetti come out. We got a girl. Blue confetti come out. Wow, it's a boy. People jumping around like, well, automatically we assume it's a girl, boy, just on the colors. So if they bust out this confetti, this pink, and everybody like, oh, congratulations, you got a girl. They said, no, we got a boy. They said, but everything's pink. Why is it pink? That's the sign of a girl. But no, it's a boy. And it gets confusion right there. Why would you do that? Boys don't have pink, And then as they come, there's that social role of gender socialization that is already in place. So you don't even have to even say what the announcement is. If you have a boy or girl, when you see that color pink, it's a girl. When you see that color blue, it's a boy. If you reverse it around and say, oh, you got blue confetti, congratulations on having a boy. Like, no, it's a girl. People are going to question that. A research analysis of greeting cards has found that the vast majority are gender stereotyped. And again, that's through socialization. Research shows in one lab study, although the infant's behaviors did not differ from boys and girls, mothers, they stated, and this is research, this is not me, this is research. At the top you see research shows. They actually did a lab study. Mothers engaged in more conversation with their infant daughters and more likely to give instructions to their sons. Now, they say this may be unintentional, but it has an effect on later life. Nonetheless, if you think about it, and just for your own purpose, just think about that. As a parent, did my mom, give me more instructions because I was a son? Because they looked at the mothers with their daughters, were they giving them more conversation? It's just interesting, but they actually did research and always respect people's research, what they've done. But just kind of keep that in mind. They said it may be unintentional, but it does have an effect later on in life. They said, have you ever wondered how this cultural behavior was established? Pink and blue emerged as gender markers in the 1950s, way before my mama said y'all was even thought of. Before me too, I was born in 1970. The identification of pink for girls and blue for boys did not become firmly established until the 1960s. People didn't start dressing babies differently until the 20th century. Before then, babies and children's clothing were mostly in neutral colors. White dresses that both boys and girls wore until they reached a certain age, and when boys would then wear pants. Why maintain the gender colors, at least in the U.S., scholars explain is the result of mass marketing and mass consumption. Color clothing, and they say I underline mass marketing and mass consumption. Color coding makes it harder for parents to hand down clothing from one child to the next, resulting into need to buy more clothes. Now you get into the business aspect. Although the emergence of child psychology experts and their influence on parents created a culture where parents started to think that it was important to distinguish between boys and girls. Now, we go into childhood playing games, and this is very important. Through play, children learn the skills of social interaction. Kind of get into the George Herbert Mead. Think about when little kids play, and they have a hell of an imagination. They may have this imaginary friend. They got a whole little conversation going on with this little doll, with this stuffed animal. They got a whole name and everything for the baby and the stuffed animal. I remember this little girl was playing with a doll, and I'm sitting there trying to play with her. I said, "What's the baby's name?" She said, "Baby." I said, that's her name?" She's like, "Yeah." I said, "You didn't give her like a regular name?" She's like, "No, I just call her Baby. Her name Baby." So okay. So she began to tell me about the baby and how the baby's not eating, how she's going to feed the baby. And I'm just sitting there chilling, because you got to play with the kids. It's always fun interacting with the kids, especially as they develop this cognitive and analytical abilities. And then they're taught the values and attitudes of their cultures through childhood playing games. Now, the games that children play have great significance for their intellectual, moral, personal, and social development, as well as for, they say, their gender identity. Getting here is George Herbert Mead. He's considered a social psychologist, and to me, he's a major sociological theorist. He described the three stages in which the socialization occurs. Now, I talk about this more in my intro to Sociology class, and you're looking about PowerPoint video. There's a little bit more information about George Herbert Mead. He looks at imitation, play, and game. Because remember, I'm going to go through these three stages of childhood playing games with George Herbert Mead. Imitation stage. Now, in imitation, the infant simply just copies the behavior of a significant person in his or her environment. So you watch a baby, they're going to do what you do. A lot of babies don't know nothing. They just looking at you, they learning, they observing, they watching. A lot of times babies watch your eyes, they watch your mouth. They just watching and observing. Very smart. And they're going to copy what they see. So I tell people, try not to curse around babies, because then the baby's going to start cursing too. But just the baby's going to watch. So, what you do, and based upon his or her environment. Now, the play stage is a child begins to take the role of the other person. And at that point, they see himself or herself from the perspective of another person. So they use the example of playing mommy or playing daddy. So they're watching the mom, they're watching the dad, and they're saying, this is the role of mom, this is the role of dad. And then they may imitate. So the little girl might put on the mom's hat, her jewelry, her necklace, her purse, her shoes, and because this is what she's observing. She's taking a role of the other person. Or a young man may put on the dad's hat, put a tie on, and, put on dad's shoes, maybe even carry dad's briefcases, something like that. Because remember, this is a stage where they're learning. Think back when you were a kid, this is the process of learning. from the perspective of another person. The game stage. Children able to do a little bit more rather than seeing themselves from the perspective of only one significant other. Mother, father, you'd even look at the siblings. My little brother used to watch me, a little sister used to watch me as well and learn. Your grandparents and stuff like that. At a time, children can play games requiring them to understand how several other people, including more than just significant others, view things them simultaneously. So as you play games, I look at even sports, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but the game stage is even just me, playing board games. I know I had learned at an early age how to play checkers and chess, which I was constant. My father taught me, and I had to learn, the different roles, and I'm watching his move at chess, and I'm thinking like, okay, what is he about to do? And I'm, and then I'm watching what he did and how his moves and how I'm going to counteract. And, it's a lot of times I had to learn this particular game of chess because it was more thinking, but it was more anticipating. And it helped develop more of a social skill for me because now I'm looking at what the other person is doing based upon not just me, but the people around me. In 2012, Erin made history by becoming the first woman to play football as a quarterback in a Florida high school. This would only have been unimaginable, they said, not that many years ago. And here he asked the question, you ever think we'll see a woman playing in the NFL? According to the book, what would it take for this to happen? Of course, we see that NFL coaches, but we're not sure how this goes. But this young lady was in 2012. She actually played football as a quarterback in a Florida high school. And I remember they had the tournament. It was the World Series, little kids, and when Chicago was really big, and they had this young girl who I think she was from Philadelphia. This is when Jackie Robinson had won for the United States, and then they went on and played overseas. But there was this young girl, I think she was from Philadelphia, and this young lady was the pitcher, and she was striking them out. She was killing them. You all can Google and look it up. I forgot this young lady's name, but she played and she was pitching. And she was throwing down. Wasn't intimidating, wasn't like, old school, oh, she throws like a girl. This time it's a compliment. When you say, oh, she throws like a girl, that girl was pitching and she was throwing and she was striking them out. And this young lady was, very, very impressionable, which was great for her to play the sport. But, she had an arm on her, she was doing it. Research shows that the pervasiveness of gender stereotype as is learned in early child playhood, as I talked about before in Chapter 1, the toys and play activities that parents select for children are a significant source of gender socialization. Researchers also found out that middle-class girls, because now they're looking at social class according to the book, with the research part, that middle-class girls are more likely than working-class girls to play using domestic themes such as brides, cooking, and dolls. In general, boys also spend more time with male stereotyped toys, where girls are somewhat more likely to play with both male stereotyped and female stereotyped toys. And I remember, as we talked before, that if it was reversed and the boys were to play with the so-called female stereotyped toys, and all hell can break loose. Like, boy, put that doll down. What you doing? Put their kitchenette set down, and of course, young men, they gonna be fathers one day. They need to know how to change diapers. They need to know how to take care of, feed a baby. They need to know what they wear around the kitchen, know how to cook, and that's part of the thing. It's not just that woman's job, so to say. So men, yes, these little boys should be knowing how to wash dishes, as my mother taught me. Get in there, wash dishes, how to go in there and cook. I also had a little brother and little sister when I was 18 years old. I had to watch them, and I wanted to watch them. I wanted to learn. I had to change diapers and everything. So it's not just, okay, here, you take her. You take the baby. No, you as a man, just as you're a child, or even a younger sibling, boys can do this. So therefore, but the old school pattern is just, all hell's going to break loose if this boy got a baby doll in his hand. Oh, no. Not masculine. Childhood playing games, children themselves impart gender expectations to each other. Young people are also bombarded with gender images from books, video games, television, and social media. Even with a greater awareness in society of gender stereotypes, advertisers still perpetuate gender stereotypes and have an influence on young children. So remember, as in beginning of chapter 1, I talked briefly about the gender socialization, but then we look at how the video games, there were less female characters early out when the video games first came out. So the young girls had maybe one or two characters to choose from. I think in the movie, I think it was Street Fighter, there was maybe one or two girls, and young girls might want their own, character to be able to play on a video game. They had to choose the boys, and they may want to choose a boy, they may want to choose a girl. Tomb Raider came out, which was very big because there was a female character in there throughout the whole video game. So it wasn't just a male-dominated game, sort of say. I'm not too big on video games. I don't know how it's going on right now. I had to don't care too much for the I forgot the name of that. But it's the video game where you walk around there and you carjack people and you do all this other, you shoot people and stuff like that. I forgot the name of that one. But I'm not a real video game person. Television, of course, there are so-called movies that, may be so-called catered towards men and catered towards women. And therefore, just like if a guy sit back with his boys and say, hey, man, let's watch The Notebook together. Guys like, well, it's a love story. We're not watching that, man. Let's watch the game. And, no, man, we're going to watch the Notebook. Great movie. However, it's a bunch of guys night, so to say. Instead of us watching football, we're going to watch this. Sometimes it's unlikely, depending on the group of men. But however, sometimes it's become a gendered image of watching so-called masculine shows. I know for me and the guys, I can speak from my own personal experience. I don't know about everybody else. But from my own personal experience, it was like the guys get together, we watching sports. Social media is something huge. I'm not too much big on social media, but if you look into it, you can see how gendered images are being expressed in social media. Even with a greater awareness in society of gender stereotypes, the advertisers still perpetuate gender stereotypes that has an influence on young children. Childhood playing games. Childhood pop culture is also full of gender stereotypes. The female characters are far more likely than male characters to be depicted with stereotype cues such as decorative clothing and to be sexually submissive, such as in revealing clothing. I'm just going back to the video game Street Fight, something like that, where the ladies were less clothed, and I'm sure there were other video games where they were like that. I'm not sure what they were. In some forms of television and movies, male characters are far more likely to be portrayed with their body in motion and with hyper-masculine accessories such as a weapon and things like that. But I love some of the movies where female leads were the characters. Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, she was tough. I remember, I forgot the guy's name, and he was, they were going through this tunnel, and he just panicked, and Sigourney Weaver just took over. This guy didn't know what to do. His men was getting killed, and she like, look, I'm taking over. And she was so much in charge, and she was so much respected. Kill Bill, one of the classics. Salt was another good movie. There's a lot of great movies where females were the lead character who, so-called was not playing this sexually submissive role, but these ladies were just real badasses, and they were just, great characters. And I enjoyed it. It's not just the men who was in charge, but the ladies as well. In video games, like I said, I know little about it, but the author talked about women are usually minor characters. Most of the highly visible figures in video games, of course, are men. That was back then. I don't know about now. So some of you gamers, don't get mad at me. I don't know. It'd be interesting in the conversations that I have in classrooms and as I get to learn from more young people, and it'd be a discussion as how is the video games right now, because I don't know. My daughter's 19, and I don't know she's not so much into video games, but I don't know. I've got to talk to a couple of gamers and find out what's it's like. Women tend to be depicted in highly sexualized ways and more often victims, and are generally cast in seemingly innocent roles. Men, on the other hand, are seen as aggressive, muscular, highly capable, and frequently carrying weapons. I like Rambo, like the Terminator as far as, and the Terminator, I forgot the lady's name, Sarah Connor was cool. She wasn't no punk with playing with the Terminator. She wasn't scared of. And I like certain movies like that, which is cool as well. Give me the action, but at the same time, it's still fun to watch. These sources of socialization send powerful messages to young boys and girls, according to the book, messages that continue as people grow older. Schools, sports, and socialization, part of the agents of socialization. Schools in particular exercise much influence on the creation of engendered attitudes and behavior, so much that some researchers call learning genders a hidden curriculum, in quotes, in the schools, according to the book. School curriculum, the materials, the teacher expectations, educational tractor, and peer relations encourage girls and boys to learn gender-related skills and self-concepts. Remember, I was in auto shop, high school, young lady walking there trying to take a class, and all the guys look at her like, because it's usually all the guys up in there. If a girl coming there, they like, what was she doing here? You know. So, and I've learned since I was in high school, because I graduated from high school in 1988, so from 84 to 88 I was in high school. So imagine, the culture has changed, and there's more home ec classes, as my students told me. And I still need to know more about, especially the curriculums in high school and grammar school, where they have more curriculum of home economics and other different courses, which teaching the boys, and it's not just a all girls class, and this is not just a all boys class. Differences, school, sports, and socialization. The difference between boys and girls become exaggerated through practice that divide them into distinct human groups, according to the book. Example, children are often seated in separate gender groups or sorted into play groups based on gender. Now, I do remember this was a kid. I'm sure it's changed, and so for you all, as they're called millennial young people, and it's more like have changed, but I remember back then, we were seated in here's the boys, here's the girls. We was always sorted. The boys over here and the girls over here. And I'm sure it's changed, and I've continued to want to continue discussions in class and learn more about the gender, how gender is being portrayed in the schools, especially in the playgroups currently today. These gender typical behaviors have consequences for how children learn in school. Boys and girls in the school with roughly equal abilities, by the time they leave high school, clear gender differences in their future plans emerge. Not all the cases, but this is what the author points out in her book, that once they leave high school, gender differences in their future plans do emerge based upon when they leave high school. So women in STEM fields, that's considered science, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. In the early years of school, girls report liking math, and they match or exceeded boys in their math abilities. I remember in high school, I didn't know that stuff, so I talked to the young ladies and said, hey, how did you do this homework? Wasn't a math person, but I'm glad I had some of the ladies that helped me out. Over time, girls report liking math and science less than boys and express little confidence in their math and science abilities despite their good performance, which is according to the research from the author that she provided. This happens even though girls take math and science credits. They get higher grades and get roughly similar scores on advanced placements. Those who report liking math and science have a higher self-esteem and have higher career aspirations than other girls, according to the author. These patterns have profound effects on the extent of gender segregation in the labor market as young men and women become adults. Now, Title IX, a federal law passed in 1972 that prohibits sexual discrimination in federally funded education programs and activities. Schools' experiences for girls and women have been profoundly changed by this Title IX. Title IX also includes schools and sports, but it is also the basis for policies against sexual harassment. One major change stemming from Title IX has been far the greater participation of girls and women in sports. A dramatic transformation from a time when rules and customs excluded women from athletics. When playing sports, even the youngest boys will be encouraged to be more aggressive and to play tough, or perhaps deliver a violent hit. I know we was encouraged playing football, hit them hard. That was the thing. Don't cry, no crying in football when we play football. And no whining and crying in football is what it told us. Walk it off, tough it up. Like I say, we do that to our little boys sometimes, and some of us push the little boys. He hurt. Oh man, you be all right. Run it off. Run it off. So I always tell them, run it off. We take a jog. Like I said, the kid could have internal bleeding. They didn't care. They just like shake it off, run it off. Let the girls, like I said, it's a little bit different. You're like, oh, hopefully she's okay, more nurturing. But back then, I don't know about now, but back then we would consider to play tough. These early messages associated sports with masculinity so much that girls who are aggressive and tough in their play might be discouraged from being so or being labeled as a boy from back then. I remember back when I was in grammar school, Shirley Jean, when I was in Roseland, Shirley Jean would go out there and play with the boys, and Yolanda Griffith used to play with us. And Yolanda Griffith, of course, went on to be a star in the WNBA. So if you Google Yolanda Griffith, WNBA, me and her grew up together right there on the block of 116th and Lafayette at Scanlon basketball course, Scanlon Elementary School. She was out there playing, and Yolanda Griffith, we played her like, rough as well. She played rough too. And it was just enlightening to see Yolanda Griffith to go on to be a star in the WNBA, and knowing that was my friend from grammar school. And she would be out there playing, and the Shirley Jean used to be out there playing better than the guys. We used to pick teams, man. I got Shirley Jean. I got Yolanda. Yolanda was tall, and she played some ball. She can shoot. Pass the ball to her. She going for a layup. She can play some ball. Additional examples, there are clear hierarchies of gender in sports institutions. Of course, there are more male coaches. They give the high salaries for men and simply more opportunities for men. In sports narratives, women are either invisible or described not just for their athletic ability, but also for their looks. And I think that was one of the things when they had some of these sports casters that are ladies, and, guys like, oh, she's cute, okay. But she know her stuff, though. She know her sports, though. So I've heard guys say, who was that pretty girl sitting back doing sports? But these young ladies, to me, they knew sports. And I could just sit back and relate to them. And I sit back and watch ESPN, and I think it's Jalen Rose's wife, and she talks about sports, and there's other ladies. And I just kind of see it's just conversations on sports. What I like to just hear, and the different perspectives from all the men and women on sports. More example, women's sports, if reported at all, are seldom the headliners in the sports sections of the media. You can see how gender is constructed by studying the titles of sports teams. Men are warriors, women names are more diminutive, and women athletes, especially women of color, are often sexualized by broadcasters in ways that men are not. I don't really hear too much of that. I mean, I'm sure it does exist. However, at the same time, when I hear negativity from broadcasters, I just tune them out, or I just put the mute button on. And I look at the sports teams, and the title, which the author points out, that when they're seldom the headliners in the sports sections of the media. And as I talk in class about this, that when we look at the so-called greatest of all time, remember, Jordan, to me, my favorite basketball player is Michael Jordan. I grew up at that time, and people talk about LeBron versus Jordan, and there's Kobe Bryant, who's the GOAT, and they look at sports, football. I'm a Terry Bradshaw fan. Terry Bradshaw, undefeated in the Super Bowl. I think he won 5 of them, undefeated in the Super Bowl. And people say, oh, Tom Brady, he got all these rings. And then you look into baseball and who's the GOAT. But then again, like I said, I like the fact ESPN reported all the success that Venus Williams had, with all the trophies and accomplishments she has made. And like, again, you put all them trophies up there together, and Venus has got more than everybody. Venus is we say in the sport, she's a beast on that tennis court. And for that's something that's her thing. She's when they say men are warriors, when they're on the sports titles and stuff and studying sports teams, you look at Venus and even Serena and some of them other young ladies. I think they can get them men and go for their game. I mean, I'm not going up against it. I know I can't do it. I'm gonna get embarrassed out there. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, we look at some of the ladies who have great accomplishments. Like I said, a friend of mine, who Yolanda Griffith in the WNBA, and she was beating guys on the basketball court in grammar school. She was winning the game of 21. She was winning them games. And I'm like, man, Yolanda's out there killing it. She was beating guys in one-on-one games. you know, and they played her rough, and she played rough right there. So it just, not only we need to look at, you know, when you put the GOAT conversation, just add in Venus Williams, because she's great as well. Although our gender identities are established early in life, changes in our status in society, for example, when we graduation, marriage, and new job, brings new expectations for our behaviors and beliefs. As we encounter new experiences throughout our lives, we learn the role expectations associated with our new status. So if we go back to the socialization in my intro class, is that you occupy a status, but you play a role. So when you go into your statuses in a society, there's a role that comes with it. And the statuses may be, for instance, myself, I became a father, and there's a role expectation that comes with being a father, being a husband when I was married. You know, there's a status that's going to be changing throughout your life. So as younger people, and as you all get older, you're going to have these new experiences throughout your life. And you're going to learn a role, especially through the new status. And so remember, you occupy status, but you play a role according to that status. As a social experience, aging has different consequences for men and women. For all older people, good health, being embedded in relationships, and the supportive community are important indicators of quality of older people's lives. So when you get older a little bit, things change. Start, you know, got to get healthy, stay eating healthy. You've been in relationships and got a support system, support community. You know, male or female, that's just part of the life of being an older person. Cross-cultural evidence shows that aging is less stress for women in societies. Cross-cultural, according to the book. When there are strong ties to family and kin, not just to a husband. Where there are extended family systems, where there is a positive role for mother-in-laws, rather than the degraded status attached to our society. People talk about their mother-in-law, oh, my mother-in-law. You know, and at the same time, there was this negative role, but nah. A lot of mother-in-laws are real cool. And where there are strong mother-child relationships throughout the life. Gender differences in the social process of aging can be attributed in large part to the emphasis on youth found in this culture, and in particular to the association of youth and sexuality in women. Cultural stereotypes portray older men as distinguished, and I don't believe this. Older women are less desirable. There's some fine older women out there. So, you know, even when I was younger, I said, man, there's some fine older women. So there's this, and you see the key words, it's a cultural stereotype, and it's portrayed. That was a portrayal. Guy, what they call them, silver fox, the men got gray in their hair, it's a distinguished look that they got. What's that guy, Mr. Stereo, grandmama they call him? The older guy, he got gray in his hair, and they say, oh, he's seasoned, he's distinguished. It's sexy about that, they say, you know, and the older women, you know, I don't say it was less desirable. You can ask a lot of men, they agree. There's a lot of older ladies still looking great in their 50s and their 60s. They still look great in their 40s. So, I know, and this is just a cultural stereotype, you know, and this is just a historical piece where the men become more distinguished and the women are not, but things have changed around, and we see each other in the older people category. I can see us as older men and women. We are not just less desirable, you know. Some of us still got it going on. So, that is it. That's all I have for this particular chapter, chapter 2. So, I will be talking about the next chapter. So, as we continue on through these conversations, so continue.